We appreciate all the support from Commissioner O'Reilly for broadband deployment. He is one of the great leaders in the field. And we have a real treat for you right now. We have our next presentation, I think, is a perfect example of why mobile connectivity and wireless infrastructure are so critical to our communities. We have Edie Davis, who spent decades in law enforcement. He ended up heading the Boston Police Department. While there, he oversaw a lot of major events, including the response to the Boston Marathon bombings in 2013. On a happier note, he oversaw physical security for 6 world championships. I guess that's a special Boston challenge. So basically they have a riot every year, and he had to control that. Here to introduce him is going to be Chad Tucker from AT&T. They're going to talk about FirstNet. Chad's part of AT&T's FirstNet team. He's also a veteran law enforcement officer himself who understands the power of mobile communications when it comes to public safety. And we're all thrilled about AT&T's efforts on FirstNet. So I'd like to welcome to the stage Chad Tucker.
Is it morning or afternoon? Thank you for being here. It's an exciting project for AT&T to be involved in. 15 years I wore a badge and a gun, and I did so, I took this job because I believed in what AT&T was doing with FirstNet, because for too long, public safety has had to deal with or use tools, in most cases, that just come off the shelf that everybody else uses, just commercially available products. You know, my taser, for example, was made for the job that I used it for, right? But the cell phones and the data connections and the equipment that we use, and down to the cell sites, down to the network, were all equipment that little Johnny also used to update Facebook, and that's a problem for public safety, is that they've never been a true priority, never had their own network, and FirstNet changes that. So rather than go through a boring PowerPoint today, I invited a friend to the stage to help me tell the story of FirstNet through his own experiences in what is one of the nation's largest terrorist attacks on our soil with the Boston Marathon bombing. So take a look at this video.
There he is, General Patton in a neon vest.
Wow. They say 500,000 people watched the Boston Marathon here in New England.
At 2:50 p.m. today, there were simultaneous explosions that occurred along the route of the Boston Marathon near the finish line.
Oh my God. Oh my God.
Many ambulances to stop. Captain 981, sir, go. Help up from the medical tent. Get as many people up here as you can from the medical tent.
And we've just gotten word of not one but 2 explosions near the finish line.
They are identified as Suspect 1 and Suspect 2.
4 days ago, my city was ruthlessly attacked. There's no explaining the savagery involved here. There's no explanation for it. I spent the last several days looking at hundreds of hours of videotape. I got to see how brutal that attack was over and over and over again. But more importantly, I got to see what the Boston police officers who responded to that scene, along with the medical personnel and the other first responders, did to put people back together. This street is turned back to the city. This area will be opened up to businesses over the next few hours, and then the people will be back here in a day or so, and they will be walking up and down the street, and then the terrorists will understand that they cannot keep us down. That the citizens of this city have been incredible. They've been patient with us. They've endured an enormous amount of heartache and aggravation over the last 4 days. But we're very happy to try to put this back together.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Commissioner Edie Davis.
Thank you.
So good morning.
Good morning. How are you, Chad?
Thanks for being here.
My pleasure.
So, my first question has got to be, did John Goodman get it right? Is that the real Edie Davis that we saw on Patriots Day?
He had real trouble with the accent, but other than that, he did a great job.
You know, the reason that I asked you to join me on the stage today is because, we could do PowerPoints and bore everybody to death, right, with PowerPoints, but I think it's important, if you don't understand FirstNet, that you understand it from the eyes and the ears and the experiences of someone who's done the job and who better than someone who oversaw the response to it's just a horrible experience with the Boston Marathon bombing. So I appreciate you taking the time to be here. You're certainly respected in the law enforcement community, and we appreciate it.
Thank you.
So if you've all watched the movies, you saw these horrible pictures of the bombing. But I'm curious as where were you that day, and what was going through your mind when you got that call and you were responding to the scene?
I had been at the finish line with my wife and a couple of members of my family, and we waited for the elite runners to come across and finish up. And after that, it's an international sporting event at that point. But after the first runners come across and the governor crowns the winners, it becomes a very local event. So I made sure that all the security was in place, and I ended up going home. I had a call with Vice President Biden that day, and so I went home to take the call from my home office because that day is a holiday in Boston. And I had just hung up with the White House when the call came in that the explosions had occurred.
So I understand. I remember I was listening to you speak a while back, and I remember that you were being driven to the scene, and you said, you pick up your phone, not to call your wife and check on dinner, but to call the FBI, and what happened?
The phone stopped working. Within a radius of about 2 miles around the blast, the cell phone had been completely inundated from people panicking, trying to call their relatives, tell people what happened. We could not get on the cell phones at that time.
So explain, and we've all experienced that if you've been in any sort of large event, sporting event, any sort of large public gathering. Why was your phone not working? And why is that a big deal to public safety?
Well, I found out later that the reason the phone wasn't working was because cell phone sites work at about 95% capacity. So when there's an incident like this and there's a big spike in usage, the system overloads and shuts down. Some people accused us of shutting the phone systems down. We do have equipment to do that in case somebody's using phones to set off devices. But in this particular case, we never used them. This was simply a systemic problem.
So what you experienced, there, right, with your phones not working is something that public safety deals with every day. And I mentioned this when I opened up, which is when it comes to your cell phone and your data connection and how you communicate in the field, other than land mobile radio, we've just always had to deal with whatever was commercially available. So you're no different than little Johnny updating Facebook, and that's essentially what was going on while you were responding to this huge attack on your city, trying to talk to people that are responding with you, like the FBI, and your call won't go through because the network saw you as no different than the people uploading to Facebook that day or to Twitter about the event, which is a problem.
Right, it is. I worked at the World Trade Center after the 9/11 attacks. It was a problem then. Congress identified it as a problem, but it's taken all these years, even up to the marathon, where it still hadn't been fixed. Thankfully, now we have FirstNet in place that will fix this.
So tell me now that you've been involved with FirstNet for the last year pretty heavily, and what would life have been like today had you been in charge of the bombing today and were responding today? I mean, let's try to get an understanding of what that experience would be, how that experience would be different today if FirstNet had been there.
Well, the great thing about this system is that we would now have priority and preemption. So if a police officer picks up a phone, if a fire official picks up a phone, if someone from EMS picks up a phone, they're going to get priority if they're competing with somebody else for the call. Or if the system is completely loaded, they will get preemption. We will push people off the system so that these vital phone calls can be connected. That's a huge component of it. It also solves the interoperability problem. This is a huge problem that Congress identified. The helicopters in 9/11, who were manned by police officers, couldn't communicate with the firefighters inside the building to tell them that the building was about to collapse. And people lost their lives as a result of that interoperability problem. This solves the interoperability problem. In addition to that, this really helps us with innovation. Police departments, there are 600,000 police agencies in the United States. Most of them are 1 or 2 people. And so there has never been a research and development arm of policing in the United States. And now we are teamed up with a Fortune 500 corporation that will allow us to utilize their R&D arm to improve our technological responses. I mean, if you had to go to a doctor here in the United States and they didn't have access to an MRI, you wouldn't go to that doctor. You'd go to one that did have access to the latest technology because your health is involved. If there's an active shooter in this building, you need the latest technology. A police officer that gets a call to 501 South Cottage Street, which is the address of this convention center, is told that there's a shooter, an active shooter in the building. Well, you try to figure out where they are in this building. It would take a team several hours to get to where the active shooter is. The technology out there now, this innovative technology that we're looking at with AT&T, will allow the police to know exactly where the shooter is in the building and respond precisely to where the threat is. That's the kind of technology that our first responders, it's not the edge, it's the tip of the spear.
Listen, let me go back to the first thing you talked about, which is priority and preemption. I think that's probably something that we should dig into a little bit more, right? So, there have been ways in the past, whether it was WPS or GETS through Homeland Security, to create some level of priority on between phone calls, but this is taking it to a different level, and we're doing it in a way that no one's ever done it before. And there's no one else doing it the way we're doing it, which is using ruthless preemption to say that on the network, when that cell site, when that system recognizes that a public safety responder is either using the phone, using a text, or using data, that it is truly the most important traffic going through the network, by the way, through a dedicated core, not a virtual core, dedicated core with end-to-end encryption. And then one step further to say, because priority gets you on the network, preemption says now you've got space to do your business, right? And that truly is, I think, something that no one's ever given public safety, right?
Right. It's been a huge problem for us. We were treated just like any other customers. We've had surveillance operations where we've had cameras out in the field watching very dangerous narcotics and gang operators, and all of a sudden, a company would throttle back our ability to monitor those cameras without telling us anything about it. So you really are putting people at risk. And what's important to remember about FirstNet is it's not just comms, it's not just communication. It is data, it is video, it is all the things that we need to do the job out there in the field.
You talked about research and development, and I mentioned that too often public safety's had to deal with whatever's available. You and I have talked before about the military has always had this complex behind them of innovators, right? When they need to solve a problem, there's some company that goes out and designs and engineers and builds and develops that product that solves a specific problem. Public safety's never really had that, have they?
No, they really haven't. Each police department was expected to understand the technology individually. Each police department would go out to bid. With police departments of 40,000 members, like the NYPD, having a very sophisticated, technology department and purchasing process, and then you compare that to small police departments in the towns that you may live in, and they're doing it basically because vendors are coming to them and selling the latest and the greatest. Nothing is coordinated, nothing is integrated. The U.S. Air Force can't buy a piece of software that doesn't work with the Marines and the Navy. There are corporations that look at that and make sure everything works well together. There's nothing like that in the United States. I think this is going to be one of the biggest and most important issues that we solve with FirstNet.
So, we've developed with the FirstNet Authority an application store, an app store for public safety. And I know recently you participated in a hackathon. Now, when I heard this hackathon was going on, the first thing I thought about was, when have you ever heard hackathon and public safety in the same sentence, right? That's not something that goes on. But aren't you seeing that? I know I am, where now there's a reason, there's a forum, there's a place to do it for people, not just big companies, but younger people, younger startup companies, as well as the big boys in the business, some of which are our partners today, to go innovate, to go develop and build tools that public safety are going to be able to use, all on the backs of this new connection that they have with FirstNet.
Exactly. When I first heard hackathon, I thought I'd be going into a room full of suspects, but the truth of the matter is, I started to realize that this really is a process that engages young people in this critical this critical topic for the safety and security of our government. And so what I've seen is disruptive technologies being developed by young people who are looking at something brand new. When up until just a few years ago, all of the CAD RMS systems, the computer-aided dispatch, the record management systems for police agencies, were based on old blue screen technology that looked like an IBM data software from the 1970s, right up to 2010. Now we have young people that are developing new systems that police departments are starting to buy across the country. This is a major problem for our industry, and as you can tell, I'm pretty passionate about this. I think this is going to save lives. I think it's going to make things safer for the men and women that I was proud to lead for many years. This is really exciting.
So when Commissioner and I were backstage, and they were miking us up, I made a joke that he's used to wearing a wire, and this one's got a clip, that goes on your shirt. And he said, back in the day, they just duct taped it to our chest, hair or no hair. And
I used to buy heroin. I know that you find that hard to believe, but I did.
First person I've ever shared the stage with that bought heroin that I know of. But I'm being silly, obviously, but it made me think about the fact that, and I'm not saying you're old, Commissioner, but you're older than me. So,
I'm old. Don't worry about that.
And I won't say that you started your career 3 years after I was born, but...
All right, that hurt.
Okay, that was too much.
You went too far.
I went too far.
You went too far.
I went too far. But what a difference. And when you started, even when I started, into where we are today, in the amount of information that public safety have access to make decisions. The challenge with that, though, is, and tell me if you agree, the challenge is that for so long you had to be a wealthy department to afford certain tools. The smaller, more rural agencies who had just as big of a need could not afford that. FirstNet, to me, seems like we're leveling the playing field with technology and innovation and the tools, the priority, and the access. That's a big deal.
It's a huge deal. When you see Parkland, when you see Santa Fe High School occurring, these are issues, along with terrorism, that all of our public safety officials are dealing with. And Santa Fe High School was in a little tiny town outside of Houston. You don't know who's going to have to respond to these things. The government has a vested interest in making sure that everyone is properly equipped with the tools that they need, and that's not just a gun and a pair of handcuffs. It's data, it's communication, it's the ability to know where you have to go and to get there as quickly as possible to save lives. And that's what happens in this new system. I'm thrilled by it.
I was talking the other day in one of my 5 states, and it was a smaller agency, and they were telling me that today, and they've got all this great equipment, but today, the state trooper has a scanner in his car, and the deputy sheriff has a scanner in his car, because even though they work the same county, they're on 2 different radio systems. And so one talks on this radio, the other hears it on this scanner, and vice versa. Now, the dispatcher doesn't have a clue what in the heck is going on.
Right.
But these two have figured out a way to communicate. And I thought, in 2018, how is that still possible? But the fact is that it is. And with this, we're now on a path to maybe level that playing field. So it's a big deal.
Yeah, it really is. We have not come far enough in first responders' experience like other companies have. We don't have the equipment that you have day in and day out. We don't have the ability to analyze information. We don't have the structures in place to purchase things properly. And so there's a mishmash of technology out there, some of it driven by the cop on the street who's buying things themselves so that they can do their job better. When that happens, it cuts out the structure of the department. So you've got data that isn't being recorded, and that's ripe for a scandal. Somebody's going to look at it later and say, oh, you were hiding this stuff. Nobody was hiding it. It's just the way the technology has evolved, and I think FirstNet's going to change that.
And I also think it's interesting that there are a lot of folks in this world who could say, we can provide this technology, we're going to do this, and we're going to do that. But that's a different relationship between them and public safety versus the relationship between FirstNet and public safety because of one word: contract. This is a contractual agreement with the government to provide these services that we agreed to provide for the next 25 years, as well as the agreements we've made with each individual state on what their build-out plan is going to look like, for example. So do you see that as a big differentiator between what FirstNet is doing and versus what others, obviously can say they could do, but could certainly change their mind down the road?
Yeah, I quite frankly, I think that anybody that's trying to fight against this is waging a war that can't be won. First of all, police follow the law. They will fall in line as to where the government tells them where to go, and that's exactly what's happened with this contract. So the states have all signed on to it. Police departments are looking right now at the difference that people are offering. And the truth of the matter is, with the huge investment the government's made on this contract, you'd be crazy to go with anybody else. And I think that decision's being made police department by police department, but logic dictates that's going to be the solution.
Did any company, AT&T included, ever walk into your office when you were the commissioner and say, hey, we're going to put 50 new cell sites in your city, where would you like to put them?
No, they did not, no.
So that's a big deal, and I think it's another point that we haven't talked about, which is how FirstNet is expanding coverage into areas where there was not coverage before. Any carrier is not typically in the business of building cell sites where there aren't people, right? You wouldn't stay in business very long.
Right.
But have you always seen that in public safety, your guys responded in the most convenient of places?
Well, no, unfortunately they don't, and they're always in the basement, or for me, it was always on the third floor of a tenement. But sometimes you don't have coverage there, and the cops on the street know that. And the great thing about FirstNet is, through FirstNet and AT&T, there's a conversation going on between the police who handle these systems and the companies that provide the service now that never occurred before. So AT&T is asking us, where are you having trouble? And we're telling them, and they're fixing that. That's an incredible thing that, would not have happened had it not been for this contract.
It really wouldn't happen were it not for this partnership, which is kind of unique. I mean, it's a very large partnership over a long period of time, so it is unique in its own right.
Yes.
So you commanded one of the largest departments in the country, and obviously one of the most horrible scenes that we've ever witnessed with the bombing. So I think everyone can kind of understand how you needed communication during this worst of the worst case scenario, right? But that really applies to, John Doe police officer with a town of 3,000 people, no different than it does you. So, how does it really affect the lives of policemen, firemen, and paramedics around this country at whatever level they're playing in at that particular day?
Well, I worked with an academic, a man named George Kelling, who was an incredible guy that did a lot of research in policing and came up with the idea of community policing. And George used to say, you have to go to ground. And I never forgot that. What he meant by that is, if you're not paying attention to what the men and women on the street need, then you're not doing your job properly. And so I used to get out in patrol cars and drive around at night. I responded to every homicide that happened in the city of Boston that I was in town for, hundreds of homicides, numerous active shooter situations, alongside the men and women who we were asking to handle this. So I always think about them in the context of new ideas and new technologies. This is the foundation of a new process for the provision of emergency services to every citizen in the United States. And it's sorely needed here. There have been other countries that have built out public safety networks already. We haven't done that, and it is just unacceptable in this day and age. Those men and women need to be protected so they can protect the citizens of our country, and that's really what's at stake here.
So, FirstNet's here. All 50 states opted in, which I don't know that we've ever seen that many politicians agree on something unanimously. All 50 governors opted in. All 6 territories opted in. The new sites are beginning that process has begun. States have their plans. Users are getting on the network. The new spectrum is being deployed. The new call centers are up in the U.S. just for FirstNet users. Those things are all underway. So we get that. That makes a lot of sense to me. But what comes next? I mean, if you could, take out your crayons and draw the future with public safety and FirstNet, what does the future really look like? I mean, this really, to me, I always tell people, this is really just step one. It's a big step. It's a $50 billion step, but it's the first step. So what really comes next, if you could use your imagination?
Well, I think the key word is innovation. What's occurring here is that you're going to have people at the very top of the technology world, the people who are in this room. They're going to have the ability to sit in a police car, to understand the problems that police, fire, and EMS are having in the field, and we're going to have the economics behind it to drive that innovation. And so it's a very exciting time for the future of policing. You really, we were a closed, kind of cloistered business for a long time, much to our detriment. The police department is opening up through community policing, through problem-solving policing. They're working more and more with the community, but they haven't leveraged the top of the business world. And that's exactly what's happening here. I'll tell you a brief story. The FBI in Boston used to have, we had a citizen police academy in the Boston Police, and the FBI had one too, and I said, wow, that's great. I didn't know the Bureau was doing that. So I talked to a few guys that were part of the Citizen Police Academy in the FBI, and it was all like the CEOs of the biggest companies in the city. And we've got like the community activists and the guys that were gang members and stuff at our community meetings. And I'm like, man, these guys are cool. I like what they're doing here, because what they were doing was leveraging the business community to get support for the programs that the FBI was behind. Totally appropriate considering what their mission is. But we have a little bit of a different mission. We have to recognize that if we're going to do that work at the street level, we also have to work very closely with people like the people in this room so that we can give our officers the tools that they need to do the job.
I say often as I speak around the country that I think this is one of the most dangerous times to be in public safety. It's a difficult time to be in public safety for a lot of different reasons. And they need the tools, and this is just one of them, to make their lives a little bit safer. And by them being safer, they're able to do their job longer and protect the people in the communities.
Right. I have a personal stake in this. My son was sworn in yesterday to the Lowell Police Department, third generation. So I'm pretty interested in this.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thanks.
Well, that big, giant flashing screen says we're over our time.
We're done.
I want to thank you for being here, and I hope that this has been helpful to understand FirstNet from the perspective of someone who knows the business very, very well. And I think you can agree with me that if you were my police commissioner, I have a little bit of confidence in you at the head of the table. So thank you for being here.
It's all about the team. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you all.